Monday, Dog Nation. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Hope you had a great weekend. I'm actually still enjoying mine. One more pre-recorded show for us today, but back live in the saddle again tomorrow. But as I've been saying, and I do feel pretty important about this, I think this is important, we're going to have a really fun show today. I'm going to look very closely at George Pickens, what he might be able to do for this upcoming year, kind of where he's been in his Georgia career thus far. We're actually going to go back in time to kind of do all of this. We'll continue our positional group look at the position group that Pickens plays along the wide receiver spot, and more from Jeff Sentell as well. So it's a really fun day. Glad to have you with us. Hope you had a wonderful weekend. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We're going to address one of my favorite topics off today's show, and we're going to kind of go back in time to do so. I have always loved talking about George Pickens on this show. I just think Pickens is incredibly entertaining. He just, always has been. You kind of never know what you're going to get, but it's almost always spectacular. It's almost always thrilling, sometimes maybe for the wrong reasons, but nonetheless, it's just always a blast anytime there's a George Pickens conversation to be had. He's one of those football players that just seems to produce a lot of highlights. And I think there's a lot of wondering of, well, what could be next for Pickens and what likely in 2021 could be his final year for Georgia. So as a way of trying to determine what could be next for George, let's go back to when it all began. And I can remember sitting, this was in our old studio. We were upstairs from where we are now, but I remember being in that studio there that day, and we were doing an evaluation of, at that time, the 2019 signing class, the group that had just come to Georgia. And we had a chance to do that with a guy that appears on our show all the time, former Georgia wide receiver Terrence Edwards, and had a chance to hear from Edwards about what he thought of George Pickens. And Edwards said something at that time that I thought was so interesting, both in terms of the level of, kind of the humble spirit that Edwards kind of brings to the table in all of his analysis. He's not a guy that, has the big head or, thinks too much of himself. There's just a real quiet confidence in his analysis, even when it comes to a guy like Pickens, who you're about to hear some pretty significant praise for. And in addition to that, how accurate so much of what Edwards said about Pickens back in 2019 turned out to be in Pickens' freshman season of 2019. So as a way of kind of understanding kind of where we've been and where we're going with George Pickens, let's go back and hear Terrence Edwards, the great former Georgia wide receiver, the only receiver in UGA history to ever have 1,000 yards in a single season. Let's go back and hear what Terrence Edwards told us here at DawgNation about Pickens way back in 2019.
I see a number one wide receiver. I see a guy that can put a team on his back when we need to play. If it's a screen, intermediate play, taking an option route, or a deep pass, when we need a play in a crucial down, I see a guy that be able to be physical enough to take the abuse from SEC defense along and making plays at the same time. That don't come along very often. So I think he's a guy that could be the next guy that could be a 1,000-yard receiver. He has the tools to do that. I don't know if he would, but I don't know if we're going to throw that much, but he has the tools to be the next receiver to come out of the University of Georgia.
First of all, there's an aspect of what Edwards says there that has turned out to be absolutely be correct, that Pickens pretty clearly emerged as the kind of guy that can be a number one receiver and can be the kind of guy that you can put Georgia on his back when he really needs to. He did that in the Sugar Bowl against Baylor. He's just had some big moments in a Georgia uniform that have certainly validated his status as a number one style receiver. And for Edwards, who has a rare distinction, the only receiver in this program's history to ever have 1,000 yards in a single season, to say, I think that George Pickens is going to be the next guy that's going to do that. That is just a really cool level of praise from a guy who would know. Edwards obviously knows the situation with Georgia wide receivers, and what he says about Pickens carries a lot of weight. And then when you think about Pickens in his first year on campus at Georgia, the notion that he would eventually be a 1,000-yard receiver, boy, it seemed even more of a possibility. What do you have, 727 yards receiving in his first year on campus at UGA? That's big-time performance for a freshman, and it's exactly the first step that you would expect a guy like that to take towards eventually being able to do something like that. We've talked before about the correlation between 1,000-yard receivers and national championship teams. Those national championship teams have someone kind of in that 1,000-yard mold. In recent years, you've seen multiple guys like that, but big receiving totals and national champions seem to go hand in hand together. And there has definitely been a thought that Pickens could be one of those type of guys, and his first year on campus seemed to suggest that was a possibility. But then in year two, there's a little bit of a step back. All of a sudden, you go from 727 yards as a freshman in 2019. Now it's 513 yards in a injury-marred sophomore season. And Pickens did miss some time because of injury. Georgia is more settled at quarterback now at the end of the 2020 season than it probably was at certain points during the 2020 season for a number of reasons. But whatever you want to kind of ascribe this to, there were less numbers for Pickens in his second year than there was in the first year, and it would lead some people to wonder, will this destiny of maybe eventually being a 1,000-yard type receiver for Georgia, is George Pickens still on his way to getting there? Is he someone that might be able to do that here in his junior season? And could Georgia's offense enjoy all the fruits that kind of come your way when you have a guy kind of break out in that kind of fashion, the way that Pickens has the potential to? And we'll obviously have to find out all of that for ourselves on the field when games start being played this fall. But it is kind of fun to think that even though Pickens had less numbers this past season than he did in his freshman season of 2019, some of the preseason evaluators, the analytics folks, they certainly haven't turned their back on Pickens as being one of the most pivotal players on Georgia's roster and really on any roster across the country as we start looking ahead to the 2021 season. I saw where Pro Football Focus the other day had him ranked as the number 4 returning receiver in all of college football. And I thought it was kind of cool in what Pro Football Focus highlighted here, that in a year in which you think, Pickens kind of takes a little bit of a step back, he's not on the field as much, he's hurt, he gets less receiving yards, but there was one aspect of his game, at least according to the folks at PFF, that when Pickens was playing, he actually took a step forward with. And so if you want to start thinking about what he might be able to do for this upcoming season, this is actually kind of an interesting point from PFF on this. Anthony Treesh is the writer here, saying that Pickens got better in a key area in 2020. He said in the contested scenarios that he raised his 27.8% contested catch rate in 2019 to 64.3% in 2020. Treesh goes on to write for Pro Football Focus that with a clean bill of health in 2021, expect Pickens to get back to doing what he does best, making highlight reel snags with his massive catch radius. So let's kind of think about this here for a moment, because that's a lot to digest. Can I just see the quote one more time, because it's the two numbers I want to highlight here for a moment. So in 2019, George Pickens caught 27.8 of his contested balls with, defensive background on his back, whatever else. He caught that ball 27.8% of the time. But in 2020, as it says before, as it says right there on the screen for those of you watching on video, raised that up to 64.3%, which is actually a pretty amazing number. And I think the folks at Pro Football Focus, I don't know if they're right about the numbers or not. I haven't crunched those numbers, but I do think they're right about that being the thing that Pickens seemingly does about as well as anybody. You throw the ball up there, and he just finds a way to go get it. He is great when it comes to pulling in those what they call contested throws. And if you want to start thinking about how that could impact him for this upcoming year, all of a sudden it does become a little easier to imagine, him having the kind of big year that seemed to be a possibility for him when Terrence Edwards first started talking about him here on DawgNation, and we first laid our eyes on him there as a freshman, that Pickens kind of going out there and finding a way to catch those contested balls, finding a way to just use his athleticism to outleap or be stronger than the defensive back that he's contesting with, that Pickens just seemingly has an ability to get that kind of stuff done. I can't wait to see what he does for this upcoming season. And here's the one thing I believe. And if you go back and watch some of the press conference stuff from when Pickens had that huge game against Baylor in the Sugar Bowl a couple of years ago, one of the things that George talked about there then was how at that time his quarterback Jake Fromm helped him get acclimated to college life coming in to UGA. Well, here we are now. Now, JT Daniels isn't quite new to Georgia. He's been here for a while. But when you think about Georgia for this upcoming season, I think a lot of times we have a tendency to think the quarterback's job is to make the receivers better. But in college football, in the way this sport is played out right now, sometimes I'm not so sure the opposite isn't also true as well. That because of how important the receiver position has become in college football, all of a sudden it's the job of the receivers to also make the quarterback better too. That the receiver position, collectively speaking, the group of guys in that group have become almost as important to success in college football as the quarterback himself. So big expectations for JT Daniels this upcoming season. Part of the reason why is because he's got a guy like George Pickens to throw to. What was it that was it Kyler Murray who said, I know he's down there somewhere. George Pickens kind of becomes that, hey, he's down there somewhere, just throw it up, and he's going to go get it type wide receiver. Pro Football Focus then gives you an interesting number on that even in a year in 2020 when the overall numbers were a little bit diminished because of injury and some other situations, actually Pickens showing some signs of improvement, and maybe 2021 is the year in which he takes a big next step with his development. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us no matter how you get to us today. Video, all kinds of platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. So much fun to be on all the various video platforms with you there. Also podcast form, Apple Player, Google Player, worldfamousDawgNation.com, Spotify, SoundCloud, a lot of different podcast platforms, and with our friends on the radio in Athens, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Great to have you with us. Really appreciate you making this a priority for you. We certainly don't take for granted the fact that you listen and watch our shows. We're very grateful for that, and really grateful for our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia for making it all possible as well. They can help equip your house with energy-efficient windows and doors. They're great at that. That keeps the energy on the inside, not escaping out. Also improves the curb appeal, which could make you money on your resale if you want to think about doing that. There's a possibility that all works out well for you too. They've got great savings for you right now as well. Between now and February 18th, so a little bit more time to take advantage of this, you can get $150 off windows, $350 off doors, or 0% APR for 36 months. Make sure you take advantage of that today. A couple of different ways for you to get in touch. Website, same as it always been, pellabranch.com. That's pellabranch.com, or brand new phone number to remember, 678-638-1496. Let me give that to you one more time, 678-638-1496. That'll get you in touch with Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Please be sure to tell them that BA sent you. And then I promise that you would take really good care of them, because I know Pella Window and Door of Georgia will certainly do that for you. All right, let me do this. It's Around the Doghouse before we hear one final installment with our really fun conversation with DawgNation's recruiting insider Jeff Sentell. Let me just briefly say how much I appreciate, obviously, we try not to spend a lot of time away from the studio. We try not to miss too many days around here because we want to kind of continue to be that daily habit for you, watching on video, listening podcasts, listening on the radio. The fact that you would give us your time like that is something we don't take for granted. So we want to try to serve you, good content every day on that. So we have been pre-recorded a little bit the last couple of days. I've been spending some time with my family and really enjoying doing that. I just really appreciate you giving me the freedom to be able to do that. And hopefully we've kept you entertained and informed when it comes to the shows. And obviously I'm sure there's some big news that's broke while we've been gone. We'll obviously hit all that. We're back live again tomorrow, but it's been really fun to be able to break away here for a little bit and spend some time with family, but also keep delivering DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, to you there as well. So Around the Doghouse, in this portion of our show the last couple of days, we've been trying to highlight some various UGA position groups and kind of what the outlook is for that group as we head towards spring practice. We did offensive line, we've done running backs, I think we did quarterback the other day as well. So let me look at Pickens' positions. We started the show by talking about George Pickens. Let me look here for a moment at the wide receiver spot. And much the same way I kind of went back in time a moment ago to start the show, let me also go back in time again here on wide receiver, but not too far back, just to about 2 summers ago, before the start of the 2019 season, or I should say before the start of this past season, the 2020 season. And I want you to listen to all the things that we didn't know about wide receivers then. about a year ago before the start of the 2020 season, after this group had really struggled a little bit in 2019, but Georgia brought in some freshmen that had a lot of promise, but we just didn't quite know what that group was going to bring to the table. In fact, even after a summer scrimmage where Smart had a chance to lay eyes on these guys himself, even he at the time wasn't quite sure what this group brought to the table. This is from summer 2020, evaluating exactly what Georgia had at the wide receiver spot. Think about everything we've learned since then. This is Kirby Smart.
We hit a wall a little bit with some of the younger guys. I think they didn't show us much today. We didn't have a lot of great vertical passing game, but Kieris, Matt, D-Rob, and George are pretty consistent. And then after that, we're trying to build kind of a depth chart among those guys, the freshmen and the other guys competing. Justin, Marcus, and Jermaine are all competing in there, along with Trey Blunt, some of the other guys. But nobody really stood out today. It wasn't like anybody was head and shoulders above the rest.
It wasn't like anybody was head and shoulders above the rest. And think about, if you want to go back to last summer when we were hearing Smart saying all those things, think about how closely we're listening to any kind of evaluation he could offer for the receiver position, because we knew how much of an issue that had been for Georgia back in 2019. One of the real reasons that Georgia didn't fulfill all of its potential in 2019, that the offense struggled as much as it did, there are a number of reasons, but one of the reasons was the fact that Georgia was just having a hard time with its wide receiver situation. So much lost talent off the 2018 roster, and 2019 proved to be a year in which replacing that proved to be quite difficult. And yet in 2020, we learned a lot about this group. What Smart did not know then, but we now know, is some of the guys that maybe didn't distinguish themselves during those summer practices. Kieris Jackson put together back-to-back 100-yard receiving games for Georgia. He looks like a real answer for Georgia as we head into 2021. I talked about George Pickens a little earlier, and what Pickens was still able to do for Georgia, even in the midst of a year in which he dealt with some injuries and everything else. We learned that Jermaine Burton, as a freshman receiver a year ago, in his second year of the program moving into 2021, has a chance to be really special. Now, obviously, guys like Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint and others are, kind of thinking about, recovering from injuries, but we finally got a chance to see Arian Smith on the field near the end of the season as well. I think one of the cool things to happen for Georgia during the 2020 season, in a year in which a lot of things just didn't go the way that UGA fans would want it to go. One of the cool things that did happen is I do think we saw a wide receiver group slowly at times, and maybe not always obvious at other times, but year over year, I think you see some improvement. We see a group that now will be a lot more, I think, favorably discussed in the offseason than that wide receiver group was going into the 2020 year there as well. And to go back in time and hear Kirby Smart speak, I think that gives you a little more context for just exactly how much things have grown. Is this the best crop of receivers in the country on paper right now? Probably not. Is it the best crop of receivers that Kirby Smart has had on paper to begin a season? I think there's a chance that might be true. So when you think about position groups, when you think about groups that are in better shape now going into this spring than they would have been a year ago for what we thought was going to be a spring practice, I think you got to put wide receiver right at the top of a pretty positive list there for a group that is certainly getting better. It's DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. So good to have all of you with us here today. And for our final pre-recorded show before I'm back tomorrow, our final installment of a very, very interesting discussion with Jeff Sintel, looking at the outlook for the 2021 class as they get ready to begin their careers at Georgia, and looking at some of those special recruiting moments from that class. Nice retrospective on all of that. Jeff Sintel here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Great to be here with Jeff Sintel on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door. What an amazing job Jeff's done here over the course of the last couple of days. We've been pre-recorded, but it's been a great chance to kind of look a little deeper at those 2021 signees for Georgia. A lot of this based off, and you should read everything that Jeff's doing there at DawgNation.com, but a lot of this based off a really good piece he had up last weekend, or I should say 2 weekends ago now, looking at those senior superlatives for those top 2021 Georgia signees. And Jeff, there was one conversation in particular that I've been looking forward to having with you, looking at the most contested recruitment for this class. And, the name that you mentioned here I thought was really interesting, maybe no surprise given the fact that this is a guy who really climbed the recruiting rankings a lot as we got close to the end of the cycle here. But Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, really impressive defensive line line signee for Georgia, and apparently, Jeff, a guy that Georgia had to really fight hard to hold on to that commitment from and get that signature from as well.
Yeah, I would say that the recruiting rewind on Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins would have a lot of a lot of chapters. I mean, South Carolina, and let's just start there. How many times has Georgia fancied a defensive line prize prospect, All-American in the state of South Carolina,
Sure,
and came away with the prize? The answer was zero until Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins. Then you had Tennessee quickly on him. You had North Carolina. You know, there's a point in his recruitment where you were kind of hearing the bell going off that, hey, Dawkins is about to make a decision, and then the decision didn't happen, and you got schools jumping in there. I think Georgia was at least one of those times where Dawkins was ready to make a commitment, and Georgia got him to hold off. We know how prized defensive linemen are. Trey Scott gets another feather in his cap in the 2021 cycle by going into South Carolina and getting a young man that was named South Carolina Mr. Football, Brandon. There's plenty of running backs that chew up yards and receivers and quarterbacks, and they give it to a defensive lineman. Always rare when I see that Mr. Football honor go to a defensive player, especially a defensive lineman that's not returning kicks on the side or doing all-purpose work as a receiver or as an athlete. And the thing about TID, we're going to make him sound cool on second reference here, is that his body really changed, Brandon. He went from that basketball player, maybe that 6'4", 235-pound power forward type, or a 4 or 5 that had that big backside in the middle, and he put on some weight in the progress of his growth and development as a high school player. And by the time he got to be a senior, especially his senior year, Brandon, he's about 6'4.5" and about 305 pounds with electric, Brandon. Find yourself a power utility company or something like that as a sponsor plug here. An electric first step off the line for Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And when you see these guys that kind of climb the rankings, or in the case of maybe someone like Jordan Davis, who has exceeded his recruiting ranking since being at Georgia, I mean, how much of that usually, it seems like it's a fairly common thing for me to see some sort of physical transformation of the body being a part of that, whether it's a really big guy kind of slimming down some, or a bigger guy getting even bigger with good weight to make him more of a formidable presence there on the line of scrimmage. It seems like when we talk about these guys either shooting up the recruiting rankings or exceeding their rating once they get in college, to me it seems like some sort of physical transformation is usually at the heart of that. You can't work on getting any taller usually, and there's certain immutable characteristics that you can't change, but there are some physical characteristics that can evolve, and it seems like that's usually at the heart of these discussions, is it not?
Yeah, Dawkins is another guy that puts a lot of work into what he's doing. He had the speed trainer, he had the agility trainer, he was always working, and it came down to it, Brandon, that he was a guy that you listen to him after he made his decision, and he called Georgia a dream school. Brennan, it was another one of those things. I would love to see the ratio. I know of at least 6 specific recruitments where Georgia somehow welcomed in a 2021 prospect in January of 2020 when there was still work left on the bone for the 2020 signing class that Georgia was, again, number 1 in the country on. And you saw that, and you saw these guys that got in early. You saw Brock Bowers got in early. You saw Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, a very seismic visit in his recruiting where it really impressed him. And then you saw other guys coming in, like Dylan Fairchild, another guy that ended up being very big because Georgia was one of those last visits before the NCAA put the kibosh on all that. And it was a good, lasting memory moment. The embers of that visit, the warmth of that visit carried over when they could go nowhere, and it set the table for good Zoom recruiting and things of that nature. So Dawkins is another guy that he really became grown into being a Georgia Bulldog. He was even a guy that was trying on the down low to work magic with after he committed during the fall to work magic with guys like Mason Smith and other guys in the class, Darian Arnold as well. He was a guy that was also trying to pull in a lot of other good guys as well. He's very excited to be a Georgia Bulldog, and I think another thing, Brandon, folks got to really get hunkered down and charged up about. When you get a lot of these guys enrolled early, Georgia's if there's one thing I didn't include in that signing superlative, as I tried to roll through maybe the big archival moments of the class, was, man, the one that's happening right now with all the early enrollees. Georgia brought in more guys as mid-year graduates in January of 2021 than they ever had before. And when you think about 6 extra months of weight training and nutritioning and good weight and just working out amongst other college players, I think that's going to be huge for Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins. And I would expect somewhere within the range of a Trayvon Walker type impact.
Wow.
Maybe he doesn't have the play that Trayvon has as a signature of his career so far against Auburn, but I can see Kirby Smart and the Georgia staff looking around and thinking, you know what, Dawkins might be one of our best football players early on, and especially off the defensive line where you can't have too many. And I think that's going to be a good start to Dawkins in his early Georgia career.
That's really fascinating, Jeff. You've called Brock Bowers, the tight end signee, your piece at DawgNation.com, the unicorn of this class. And, boy, the closer we get to it, the more interested I get in Bowers. And admittedly, some of this is probably related to the fact that I wanted Georgia to get a Rick Gilbert. They didn't. And yet when you look at someone like Bowers, I mean, his pass-catching credentials, didn't have a senior season in California, obviously, but some of the stuff he did going back to his junior year, this is a guy who's really shown a level of polish when it comes to being a receiving target. And as the Georgia passing attack seems to be coming into full form here, the tight end position is seemingly going to be a part of that. Obviously, there's a lot to like about Darnell Washington, and there are other tight ends in this position group who can really play. But, man, there is some real intriguing aspects to Brock Bowers' game, is there not?
Yeah, and the reason he's called a unicorn, Brandon, is there's not another guy like Brock Bowers. As well as Georgia recruits year in and year out under Kirby Smart, I'm going to pound the table a little bit here for Brock Bowers because there's nobody like him on campus. You're talking about, I think he caught 31 touchdowns, Brandon, in his sophomore and junior year. And, yeah, somebody could say something about California high school football and in wine country, him coming out of Napa. But he averaged like 20 yards per catch. He returned kickoffs. He was an outside linebacker. He was a running back. Brandon, he had a game in high school where he had an 88-yard kickoff return, 50-yard touchdown return, a 50-yard touchdown run. He had about 4 or 5 tackles and a sack. But then he also had another, 3 catches for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns receiving. Brandon, here's the physical things that, listen to this, and try not to swerve off the road or get too excited or high five your dog. But, I mean, Brock Bowers can run a 4.55 laser. That was even going into his senior year. This was his junior year. And Brendan, he posted a 40-plus inch vertical leap. And at 235, 225, 235 pounds, Brendan, there's nobody in the program that's 6'3.5", 230, can run a 4.5 with a 40-plus vertical that's caught 31 touchdowns in 2 years. It's going to come down to this. Everybody wants to know, well, Georgia's never going to – I'm going to try and sum it up the most stuffed shirt voice I can. There's no way Georgia's going to have any more than 4 or 5 playmakers at the receiver position than what they will have out of Brock Bowers early. You think about those Travis Kelce routes we saw in the playoffs. You saw those routes where the tight ends are coming across on screens. He's going to be a matchup problem already because he's a guy that just got ball skills and the ability to make plays. No offense to some of these other guys, but he's really fast and big and athletic with ball skills, Brandon. This is a new toy for Todd Monken that I don't think they've quite had all the bells and whistles on a tight end type in Athens yet. I mean, yeah, sure, Darnell Washington looks like a skyscraper out there, but he doesn't have no 41-inch vertical, and he's not running a 4.5 laser with all these ball skills and big plays. So this is going to be a fun one to watch. If they can't get Brock Bowers some look plays during the course of his first season, you got to wonder if they really have anything for tight ends in the future if they can't feed this man.
All right, we're going to finish with this, Jeff. Over the course of the last couple of days, we've had a great look back at what Georgia brought in for the class of 2021. And as we talk about all this stuff, obviously the class of 2022, the pursuit of these elite prospects has certainly kicked into high gear. Gunnar Stockton, the quarterback, is in the fold. Bear Alexander, very impressive defensive tackle prospect. He announced his Georgia pledge last week. Kind of give me a little bit, as we get ready to say goodbye to you, give me a little bit of a thumbnail sketch for what's coming next for the class of 2022. You've done a good job talking about some of the wide receivers, tight end, pass-catching targets that could be attracted to Georgia because of Stockton. But what else do you look at on the horizon for Georgia with its 2022 class now?
So we like to process lots of information, Brandon, on our website really fast with some bullet points. It kind of look like bullet points on a resume. I'll give you 3 bullets for the 2022 cycle right now. The first one is the Gunnar effect. Brandon, if you ever see this young man in person at an athletic workout, it's almost like he has magnets in his elbows about how guys are just drawn to him. And it's not just after they see him unleash a laser 65 yards or something like that. How far you can throw the ball, the velocity, the mechanics that were built by George Bobo, they're really nice to see, but it's the amount of players that noticed, that gave you that little, like, whoa, when he committed to Georgia. Most thought he was going to go to Auburn. I think it's going to make big differences for Georgia's chances in the recruitment of guys like Denylon Morissette, Oscar Delp, and also Kojo Antwi, especially with Morissette being a guy that's maybe has trended to Alabama for a long time, but Alabama, Brandon, just got 4 top 100 receivers in their 2021 signing class, which is seen as the number 1 all-time in the modern recruiting history. I don't know if Alabama is going to have a lot of room for maybe 2 receivers, 3 receivers in this class, and if it's Alabama, they're probably going to take another 5-star as well to add to this class and maybe find that John Mechie in an odd year, which means that I think Georgia's chances for Denylon Morissette go way up. Number 1's the Gunnar effect. Number 2 is a lot of quick starts, Brandon. I know you like hearing this, but Georgia, let's face it, we'd like to see where they're at the starting line of a recruiting cycle, and that is at the finish line of the previous cycle. Georgia had 8 commitments already for the 2022 cycle, especially with names like Big Bear Alexander, Gunnar Stockton, and Donovan Westmoreland heading into the national signing day for the 2021 cycle. So that was a lot of. Normally they only have like 2 or 3. This time they had 8, and 7 of those are in-state prospects. The other thing, Brandon, is there's going to be the third and final bullet point. Is there's going to be some quick work done. You start looking at names, and Manuel Henderson, the 5-star, is going to make his decision in March. Mikael Williams is going to make his decision in March. Kristen Miller is going to make his decision in April. You have a lot of guys all of a sudden thinking, all right, I got what I need. I'm going to make my decision. And that's going to be some early momentum or some early kind of makeup work on other guys where it could be a great February, should be a great February for Georgia in 2022 recruiting, at least the progress they can make. And Brandon, this is the gangbusters moment for this part. When we're looking ahead to 2022, you want to talk about perfect, ideal timing, whether that's like Tampa Bay getting Brady with all those pass rushers and Antonio Brown and Leonard Fournette and Mike Evans, all those weapons he had. Consider this. Let's say Mr. NCAA says, all right, it's May, mid-May. We only made you poor recruits wait another month for 15 months without on-campus visits. Whenever they ring the bell and whenever that checkered flag goes up for the final lap or the green flag goes up, Georgia's going to say, hey, come to this campus right here. Oh, by the way, have you seen our new $66 million weight room expansion and that new facility that used to be at Butts-Mehre? And, I've already heard recruits tell me about it. They've been on virtual tours about, things to do in the locker room, things to do where they'd never want to leave the football complex, barber shops, locker rooms, weight rooms, meeting rooms. Georgia, which basically didn't need any nitrous oxide in the tank to recruit well in a cycle, they're going to open their doors with really a Taj Mahal of Georgia football to show off, and somehow the timing here is going to be great because these recruits are going to be starving for something to see after not going anywhere for 2 years, and they're going to see Georgia kind of looking like Alabama in terms of a Disney World with everything they want to do in terms of a football player's heaven when they do start recruiting again.
Well, Jeff, it's a lot of fun to think about. Can't wait to watch the way this all plays out over the course of the next few weeks. And, of course, can't wait to read everything you write about it at DawgNation.com as well. You've been so generous with your time over the course of the last couple of days. Thank you so much for getting us up to date on all that's going on with UGA recruiting. Can't wait to talk to you live again on a show very soon. But thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And hope you have a great week. We'll look forward to chatting with you very soon.
Thanks, buddy. Always a pleasure being on your show.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So great stuff with Jeff Sintel. Really appreciate his time over the course of the last couple of days. We didn't get to do a lot of this in December, looking back on that 2021 class, so getting a chance to do that here over the last couple of days has been a really nice thing to be able to do, and hope you've enjoyed that there as well. Time now for our SEC Through. We've also been kind of doing a little bit of a post-signing day look at the rest of this league. We looked at the outlook for the SEC East on Thursday. We looked at the challenges to Alabama in the SEC West on Friday, and I want to kind of do one more thing related to this in terms of the coaches who are about to begin their SEC careers, and also a few guys getting ready to move into a year two there as well. Let me start with the guys who are getting ready to do it for the very first time here for this upcoming season. You got Shane Beamer at South Carolina. You got Brian Harsin there at Auburn. You got Josh Heupel at Tennessee. I won't even mention the Vanderbilt situation because at this point in time, I'm not sure anybody cares about Vanderbilt at all. We'll just hope they'll field a team in the 2021 season. But I don't think there's any doubt here of the three major programs with new coaches. I don't think there's any doubt that the outlook for Harsin is potentially better than it is for both Heupel and for Beamer. First of all, Auburn's just a better program anyway right now than both those other programs are. But, Harsin also brings back his quarterback, for instance. That's a pretty big deal. You bring back Tank Bigsby. At one point in time, there had been some thought, well, maybe Bigsby might look to go somewhere else. But Bigsby's back for Auburn here again in 2021. I think that Derek Mason may prove to be one of the better coordinator hires recently. Mason as a head coach, I'm not so quite sure that I like him there in that role right now. Mason as a defensive coordinator, you've seen what he did at Stanford. This is a sharp defensive mind. I think Auburn's going to be very happy to have him as defensive coordinator. Obviously, Mike Bobo has been a good offensive mind before, and admittedly, some of the offensive stuff for South Carolina a year ago did not go too well. I talked about this yesterday. You look at Luke Doty at quarterback, you'll have to wonder why did Carolina wait as long as they did to make him the starter. I think some of that you kind of probably point the finger at Mike Bobo on. Certainly nobody in Columbia has anything nice to say about Bobo right now because they thought he was coming back and he chose to go to Auburn instead. Most people would typically say Auburn's a better job than South Carolina, but Auburn's also not exactly on firm footing right now. The new coach and Brian Harsin in its own right. So it'll be a little bit of an interesting spotlight on Bobo this year, but ultimately I'll be shocked if Brian Harsin doesn't have the most wins of any of the first-year SEC coaches. The big challenge related to him, though, is it's two huge road games in the beginning of the year before you face Georgia there in the month of October. Auburn has to go to Penn State, which doesn't seem as daunting as it once did because Penn State wasn't very good in 2020, but it's still a road game in Happy Valley. If there are any fans in that stadium at all, that's a pretty tough place to win, even if Penn State's not quite as good as maybe they were supposed to be under James Franklin. You're also on the road at LSU as well, a place that Auburn has not won since 1999. So it's certainly a tough schedule to start for Brian Harsin there at Auburn, and an opportunity for him to kind of prove what he's all about there. He's a guy that's a proven winner at Boise State. He is probably a solid, if not spectacular, coach, but it could be just tough with road games early. The Georgia game looming. It's obviously the one thing that probably got Gus Malzahn fired more than anything was his lack of success against Georgia. So an interesting scenario facing him there. In the case of Heupel and Beamer in their first years, I think anything other than an unmitigated disaster they ought to be very, very thankful for, because I think it could be pretty ugly for both Beamer and for Heupel. It's pretty clear to me that Harsin is in by far the best shape of any of the first-year coaches. How about that group of guys, though, getting ready to go into their second year? Pretty high-profile hires. Sam Pittman, the former Georgia offensive line coach at Arkansas, who was, as we predicted this, we'll give ourselves credit for this, one of the real surprises around college football in terms of what he did in Arkansas year one, thought to be playing the toughest schedule in the country. Still found a way to win 5 games there. Great coordinator hires, Kendall Briles in the offense, Barry Odom in the defense. They held on to Odom during the offseason, even though some programs came after Barry Odom there. But he doesn't have the veteran quarterback anymore. Felipe Franks isn't there. And frankly, what the 2 other second-year coaches did in recruiting was actually not bad. Top 25 class from Mississippi State. But Ole Miss in particular really kind of getting it done from a recruiting standpoint. And obviously Lane Kiffin does bring back his veteran quarterback. He does bring back Matt Corral. We said a year ago that we thought that Arkansas was in better shape than either of the Mississippi schools, but this could be a year that Lane Kiffin kind of makes that second-year jump. I still like the Arkansas stability a little more than what's going on there at Ole Miss, but there's no doubt that from a recruiting standpoint and some of the other things around the program, there's a little bit of energy around Kiffin there in Oxford, and the Rebels, Freudian slip, the Rebels managed to hold on to Kiffin during the offseason as well, with at least some rumor mill chatter that he might have looked around. So interesting scenario for those second-year coaches. I think Pittman would still be my guy at Arkansas, but Kiffin for now is making a little bit of noise, and will make that your SEC through. And one more time as we get ready to say goodbye here today, I will say a big thank you to you for your patience while we've been away, but still trying to do shows the last couple of days. So hopefully we've done right by you, and we'll look forward to seeing you back here live again tomorrow on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, where we will also award a golden shoe for the first time in a few days. So thank you for your submissions on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. Just simply show me why you're a Gatorator. Photo from your past, cool Photoshop type stuff. People have had some real fun with that. It's been very entertaining for me. I love giving out a golden shoe on the program each and every day. And by the way, people seemingly have enjoyed the Tennessee prop we've had here on the desk with the money bag there as well in the fast food bag. So folks have had some fun with that. Speaking of have some fun, I hope we're all having fun 257 days from right now in Jacksonville, looking for a win against those lousy, stinking Gators. Can't wait for that. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. I'm going to make this pretty quick here today, but I certainly appreciate all of you watching and being a part of the show, and appreciate your comments. Big thanks to R.S. Andrews for making the R.S. Andrews cool down possible. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric, all of those things. You can certainly trust R.S. Andrews to do all of that for you. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. I love the comment section. I love our freedom to be able to do this, and we would not be able to do this every day. My bosses would make me do some other kind of work if it wasn't for the fact that R.S. Andrews allows us to do that. So big thanks to Dari and the whole team over there at R.S. Andrews. To all of you as well, appreciate your participation in the show. I hope you guys have a great day. I will see you back here on Tuesday, which is tomorrow, for DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Looking forward to being back with you. Can't wait to see you then. Hope you have a great day, everybody.